Hello everybody, welcome back to the workshop. Got another real treat today. I'm going to do a deep dive into a couple old hand planes just to give you an example of a type study. The bigger one is a number 4 and I believe it's a type 6A, and the smaller one is a Stanley number 3 and I think it's a type 6. So they're both very similar but somewhat different, and they're not completely true to the type study, but we'll get into that. So I appreciate you coming by, checking out the video, and let's dive into it. And any discussion of a type study, of course, refers to these two books, John Walter's book, Roger K. Smith's book. These guys went into great detail about the variations on the various types and took the time to put the type study together. So hats off to them. And I believe pretty much every other reference to a type of Stanley plane is referencing these two books. Okay, so here they are. Let's talk about the number 4 first. They're a little more common than the number 3s. If you're out in the wild and you happen to find a plane like this, perhaps you're going to immediately recognize it looks like a very old plane. And any of these old, well-made planes can probably be turned into very good users. If you know what you're looking at, you can see that they have the low knobs. The furniture, the knobs, and the tote definitely seem to be made of an exotic wood. This is rosewood, tell by looking at it. There's no logo or trademark on the lever cap, again indicating it's kind of old. The depth adjustment on both of these are the smaller size, which may or may not indicate age because some of the secondary planes and lesser known planes had smaller knobs on them. But the telltale sign for most of these is the lateral adjust lever. The little tab on it on both of these, see there's a little flag here that's swaged into the actual lateral adjust lever. And at least in my neck of the woods, that's a pretty good indicator you're looking at a Stanley Bailey. Although there are a couple planes out there in the world that also have a very similar lateral adjust. So the Type 6, according to Roger K. Smith, went from 1888 to 1892. However, John Walter broke that into a 6 and a 6A. This is an example of a 6A. The 6A went from 1891 to 1892. So the Type 6 that was not a 6A went from 1888 to 1890. So here's an example of a plane that has the high knob, and the high knob didn't make its appearance in the Stanley planes till the late Type 11s, somewhere around World War I, which was a good 20-30 years after this guy was made. And the lateral adjust appeared in the Type 5s, 1885, so you know this is not Type 4, it's at least a Type 5, and it's certainly not the high knob era. So we've narrowed it down to the late 1880s to somewhere around World War I. The type study also indicates down here the number 4 is spaced a little further apart between the NO and the actual digit. So unfortunately I don't have a hand plane to show you, but based on the diagrams I've seen on the earlier models, the NO and 4 maybe had a single space between it, and here you can see they spaced it out a little bit more. And for example, here's a Type 4 that I have, and there is no model number stamped on it at all. And also, according to the type study, the sides of the body of the plane, the cheek here, is noticeably lower. In fact, if you look at this one, you can see there's a fair amount of space between the top of the cheek and the area on the lever cap where it changes direction. And if I compare it to my old number 4 here, you can see the cheek seems to be sitting a bit higher. And if I put the two planes side by side, you can see the Type 4 in the background certainly has a taller cheek. So my Type 6 here, the number 3, has a depth adjustment knob that's appropriate to that type, and it has some lettering and some patent dates on the inside of it. And taken from Roger K. Smith's book, August 31st, 1858, and August 6th, 1867. Where my Type 6A depth adjustment knob is significantly dirtier, but there's no lettering in there. This is actually a depth adjustment knob. Seems to be more appropriate to an early Type 7. Type study also indicates that with the Type 6 there's a new profile on the tote, and they don't elaborate, they just say it's new. And they give you some outline drawings to show you what the various totes look like, but I can't really tell by looking at the drawings how they differ. So the best I can do is compare my old 4, but to my eye the older one here on the Type 4 seems to be leaning forward a little bit more, and maybe that's what the type study is talking about. And there's sort of a view of them back to back. I'm not sure that's shedding any color. But you can see on the older one it seems to be leaning forward a little bit more than over here on the Type 6A. So now let's open these up. Number 4 here, there is the telltale nib that identifies this as a 6A. The iron does not appear to be period appropriate. It appears to be the T trademark, which debuted about 20 years after I believe this plane was made. It has knurling on the nut, and best I can tell, this knurling happened sometime in the Type 6 era. The chip breaker, however, has the Stanley Bailey stamp on it, which is period appropriate. This was all the way up through the 6As. According to the type study, you don't see these in the Type 7s. If I look at my number 3, there is no nib on the inside of the lever cap. Very interesting. This iron has the hole at the top, which according to the type study didn't make it into the Type 6s. So perhaps this is original to the plane, perhaps not. And here's a close-up of this particular trademark. This is known as the J trademark. It does have the Stanley Bailey stamp on the chip breaker. The nut that holds the two pieces together is smooth. There's no knurling on it, and that does seem to be appropriate for Type 6. So another subtle distinction is the profile of the heads for the screws that hold the frog in place. To a Type 3, these were actually round head screws, and at Type 4, they made them square head screws. And sometime later, around Type 6 or Type 7, it's not clear to me, they put a tiny chamfer on the head. And these ones seem to be pretty gosh darn square to me. And there's a close-up of the screw head, and you can see there's really no chamfer on those at all. So in contrast, if I compare it to this Type 16, if you look at those screws, you can see there is a subtle chamfer on them. And starting with the Type 6s, the lateral adjust lever had a disc down here to engage the iron. The Type 5s had a lateral adjust lever, but they just curled up the lip, the bottom of the lever, to engage the iron. And each of these in the Type 6s and the Type 7s, the lateral adjust has the word Stanley embossed in it, and there are 3 patent dates stamped into it. They're typically pretty difficult to see without either excellent eyesight or magnification. And there's a close-up of that lateral adjust. Just barely make out those patent dates. 2/8/76, 10/21/84, and 7/24/88. On this particular one, it's much harder to read. I don't know if it was abraded off by somebody trying to polish it, or maybe just the stamping wasn't so hot. But down here, there's faint images of the stamping of the patent dates. Curious how the recess and the frogs are slightly different shapes. Don't know if that has to do with the fact they're different model numbers or slightly different types. Here's the frog on the 6A, and you can see telltale nib right there identifying this as a 6A. If you look inside the depth adjustment knob, there's just a fair amount of dirt. And on the Type 6, there's no nib, and there you can get a better view of the stamping inside the depth adjustment knob. I've read that the body of the Type 6A could also have a nib on it. I think it sits back here behind the frog. My own personal view, I kind of break the Stanley type study into generations or families, and it's largely based on the body with the frog and frog seat. And this is the 4th generation of frog seat and frog that Stanley came up with. Types 1 and 2, I don't have one to show you, I can only describe it. It was either a capital H or I that the frog sat on. The Type 3s had a wonky frog that didn't last very long, and then the Type 4s and 5s kind of had a flat platform, more or less this shape, but it was generally the whole thing was milled flat. And then when you get into the 6, 7s, and 8s, they milled a couple shallow grooves that the screw goes down into. So this would be the 4th generation of the Stanley Bailey body to accept the given frog. And finally, each of these has a solid brass barrel nut that holds the furniture onto the body. This particular Type 6A that I have, the Japanning looks pretty good, although pretty dirty. The tote looks in pretty good shape, however there are 2 what appear to be brass pins driven into the top. I'm not sure what that's all about. I don't know. Done by an owner long before I ever owned it. I noticed that there's a little nick taken out of the corner of the frog. That's a shame, but not too bad. Again, the Japanning looks in pretty good shape for a tool that is so old. The chip breaker looks in good shape, and the lever cap looks to be fine. So overall, this is a nice example of a user of a Stanley Bailey 6A. Not a museum piece, but certainly in very nice condition for its age. Looking at this Type 6 number 3, also the japanning looks to be in really good shape. Looks as though somebody had done some mild cleaning on this. I don't think that was me. Don't remember, to be honest. Chip breaker looked to be in good shape. There's still a fair amount of meat left on the iron. That's kind of nice. Lever cap looks, for all intents and purposes, to be fine. And the frog also looks teeny bit of chowdering on the screw. Lateral adjust lever, kind of loose, but certainly nothing wrong with it. So I've done some research, and I think the real tell for the age of this Type 6 number 3 plane is this iron. It has the J trademark on it, which according to the type studies was gone by the end of Type 5s. They indicated that latter Type 5s moved on to a new trademark that was sort of a block lettering. And it's funny, I have a note here that I made to myself a while ago, and I did some research that this particular iron ended in 1884. However, I dug a little bit deeper, and there's a resource that I lean on a lot. It was a website that used to be up by Prime Shop, where they had a spreadsheet, and I'm showing it to you here using the Wayback Machine. And according to his tracking the various features through the types, he sort of had a gray area between the Type 5 and the Type 6 at 1888. And he indicated that this iron was indeed used up to 1888, which would have brought it to the beginning of the Type 6s. And since this is on the Wayback Machine, and I'm afraid one of these days I won't be able to access it, I actually took the time to transpose all that information onto my own spreadsheet, and I have been updating this spreadsheet as I learn more, trying to add more detail to it. But that's the topic of another video. So, in my opinion, there's a few reasons why a plane like this could theoretically have a J logo on it. According to Roger K. Smith and John Walter, you know, this is an iron that's older than the plane, so somebody may have worn away the original iron, which I think would have taken years. And when he went to replace it, he got his hands on an older one. I mean, that's certainly a possibility. It could also be that maybe the owner of this plane a long time ago had a couple of them, and simply when he disassembled and reassembled them, he switched the irons. And of course, another likely scenario is maybe the original iron to this plane is long gone, and somebody hunted around to find a more period-appropriate iron, and this is the one they found. We will never know. So in summary, I'm delighted to own these two planes. I enjoy working with them, and I think they're gorgeous personally. I think this one, my best guess is I want to believe it's all original, and that is an iron that came on this plane well over a century ago. I think it's a very early Type 6, probably 1888, and I think it's kind of cool to own such an interesting piece of history. And this one's a real beauty too. I think it's certainly a Type 6A. It has the nibs on it. I think it's kind of cool. And I think it's a ladder Type 6A. And I'm giving some thought as to what I might do to clean this up and shine it up a little bit, but that's the topic of another video. Let me know if you've got any thoughts on it. And I appreciate it if you've made it this far through the video. Thought I would share some of the things that make a Stanley Type 6 and 6A unique. Maybe it'll help you type your own hand plane, or at least get an appreciation for the way Stanley did things 130 odd years ago. And like I always say, thanks for stopping by. Stay safe, take care, keep your eyes out for the next one.